A young mother's murder reveals shocking secrets. Today, we're delving into a chilling story. Please support my channel by subscribing and turning on notifications. Sometimes, one person's actions can set off a series of events that devastate entire families. The boundary between grief and rage is so fragile that crossing it might mean never returning. In a secluded village beneath a facade of tranquility swirls a storm of human emotions. Jealousy, betrayal, and vengeance weave invisible bonds that compel people to act in secrecy. This tale explores how powerful emotions can fracture lives and even the strongest of bonds. Who will bear the cost of overwhelming sorrow, and at what expense to those who remain? One night, the peace was broken by a baby's cry, slicing through the silence. A man, sweating with fear, hurried upstairs. His heart thumped loudly with dread about what awaited him. In the bedroom, a gruesome sight stopped him cold. His wife, Maeva, lay motionless, bloodied, and face down on the floor. Their son, trapped under her arm, wailed inconsolably. Shock and confusion seized the man. What had transpired here? Just hours before, everything had seemed normal. His shift at the restaurant had run late due to a wedding celebration, and he had informed Maeva he would be home later than usual. They had exchanged texts throughout the evening, but her replies ceased around midnight. He assumed she had simply fallen asleep after a long day. He arrived home at 12:49 a.m. to an unusually quiet house. Although the door was unlocked, he thought little of it at the time. The only oddity was the silence and the switched-off TV. Confronted with this horrifying scene, he struggled to piece together the events. Had she fallen and injured herself? Frantically, he called 911. The operator instructed him on performing CPR. He desperately administered chest compressions and breaths to Maeva, but a sinking realization hit him that it was too late. The paramedics arrived at 3 a.m. and confirmed the tragic truth. She was gone. Their son was safe, yet the cause of Maeva's death remained unclear. When investigators arrived at the family's home, they were unprepared for the grisly scene. Blood was splattered across the walls and even the ceiling, suggesting a violent struggle. However, they soon realized that this was not a simple case of domestic violence or an accidental fall. Maeva's skull was nearly crushed, and her body bore evidence of repeated blows, with bruises on her hands and back indicating she had fought fiercely to protect herself and her son. Emergency responders were on the scene by 2:48 a.m., but it was already evident that this was a deliberate murder. The medical examiner confirmed the severity of the assault. Maeva had suffered extreme violence, yet there were no signs of sexual assault. Initially, it seemed like a robbery might be the motive, especially when Maeva's purse, complete with her personal items and cash, was found near a pond close to the restaurant the next morning. However, this theory quickly disintegrated. All signs indicated that Maeva was the intended target. The pressing question was, who could commit such a heinous act? Police delved into the family's past. At first glance, Maeva and her husband Alain appeared to enjoy a tranquil life. Childhood sweethearts, they grew up in the same village and attended the same school. Their life seemed filled with joy. Shortly after their wedding, they discovered they were expecting, and their son Lorenzo was born the following year. The family had settled into a cozy home, and Maeva was excited about her plans to open a nail salon, even considering a larger house to accommodate her business. But just 3 weeks before they were due to move, tragedy struck. The shock of Maeva's sudden death left her family and friends reeling. Though their lives looked idyllic on the surface, the investigation unearthed troubling secrets. It was revealed that Alain was entangled in illegal drug-related activities and had previous encounters with law enforcement. While Maeva knew about Alain's illegal activities, she strongly opposed them. After Alain was arrested, she rejected an offer to buy a car for 100,000 euros with money from his shady dealings, stating she didn't want dirty money. Her disapproval extended to Alain's friends, who often visited for business purposes. Maeva wouldn't allow Alain to meet with these associates, which irritated some of them. Some of these people, including old school friends, were upset by Maeva's interference, leading to tensions. Maeva's family believed these connections might have contributed to her murder, suspecting that Alain owed someone a significant amount of money and that the crime was a message. However, Alain denied that anyone in his circle could commit such an act. He promptly informed the police about all his contacts and business dealings, assuring them he had no outstanding debts or major disputes. The police quickly dismissed the theory of a criminal dispute. The crime scene at their home was undisturbed except for the missing purse, which was found with nothing taken from it. But the investigation took a twist when police learned that 6 months prior to the murder, Maeva and Alain had been receiving threats from an elderly couple in a neighboring village. These threats originated from a dispute involving Maeva's father's best friend. The investigators began tracing the couple's whereabouts on the night of the murder, uncovering shocking details. It was hard for the village to believe that a man who often visited Maeva's father and supported him through difficult times was actually the perpetrator. The breakthrough came from two witnesses who reported suspicious activity on the night of the murder. The first witness, a young doctor, was taking a late-night walk with his baby in a stroller when he noticed a man in pink rubber gloves trying to stay hidden. When the man saw the doctor, he quickly turned and walked away. The doctor noted the strange behavior of the man and even managed to remember part of the license plate of the car he saw nearby. Another witness, driving home with his wife, also spotted this man, identified as Rue Berrois, driving slowly down the street, appearing to be scouting the area. Finding his actions suspicious, this witness decided to contact the police. Acting quickly, investigators tapped the Berrois family's phone lines, a strategy that soon yielded results. During a conversation, Rue Berrois' wife, Enda, accidentally implicated her husband. She mentioned to a friend that on the night of the murder, Rue had come home with Maeva's missing purse, proudly showing it to her and declaring, "See, I did it." The police arrested the couple immediately following this revelation, and Rue Berrois quickly confessed. He had been struggling with the grief of losing his son, Rudolph, a few months earlier. On the night of the murder, after having dinner at a friend's house, he visited his son's grave at the cemetery. He used the gloves and shoes he normally wore for cemetery visits. Overcome with anger after leaving the grave, he drove to Alain and Maeva's home. He entered easily as the door was unlocked, carrying a baseball bat he kept in his car for protection. Rue encountered Maeva and her son on the second floor. Maeva woke up and recognized him, but before she could react, Rue brutally attacked her with the bat. He reenacted the entire crime during the police investigation. After killing Maeva, he took her purse and left the house calmly. Back at home, he showed the purse to his wife before disposing of it. The next day, he burned the baseball bat in his fireplace. The village was stunned upon learning that Rue Berrois, a man who had been actively supporting Maeva's father and showing keen interest in the police investigation, was the perpetrator of such a horrific crime. Their disbelief was profound, struggling to reconcile the helpful facade he maintained with the brutal reality of his actions. Rue Berrois consistently inquired about the investigation, particularly whether Maeva's purse or any clues had been discovered at the crime scene. His violent actions were deeply rooted in the tragic loss of his son, Rudolph. 8 months prior to the murder, on August 21st, 2011, Rudolph was involved in a fatal car accident. He was speeding toward Alain and Maeva's house, intending to confront them when he lost control of his vehicle, veered off the road, and died shortly after the crash. Rue held Alain and Maeva accountable for his son's death, and his resentment intensified with each passing day. Rue's wife, Enda Berrois, maintained a daily ritual of lighting candles at an altar dedicated to Rudolph. Their home became a shrine filled with photographs of Rudolph, adorned with symbols of mourning. Quiet conversations with Rudolph's spirit were part of Enda's everyday life. She was convinced that her son's death was more than a mere accident and relentlessly sought the truth. On the night of the accident, a profound change occurred within Enda. She was overcome with hatred and a desire for revenge. Enda refused to accept the official explanation of the accident. She doubted the competence of the investigators and forensic experts who concluded that Rudolph simply lost control of his car. Suspicious circumstances such as Rudolph's body being found outside the vehicle and discrepancies in the seatbelt marks fueled her belief that someone else was driving. No amount of forensic evidence, including DNA tests and phone records, could convince her of an accidental death. Enda painstakingly gathered evidence, took photographs related to the accident, and was determined to identify the responsible party. Even months later, she persuaded her husband to drill into Rudolph's grave, hoping to capture his voice on a tape recorder and communicate with him posthumously. Over time, her obsession narrowed its focus onto Alain and Maeva. In Enda's tormented perception, she developed a sinister theory that they had orchestrated her son's demise. Her animosity towards Maeva intensified as she uncovered more about their past connections. Years earlier, Maeva and Rudolph had been in a relationship during their teenage years, which appeared to be a typical youthful romance to others. For Maeva, Rudolph was her first true love. During her youth, she was deeply infatuated with him, but as time passed, she recognized that his unfaithfulness and constant dramas were too much. By 2009, Maeva made the difficult decision to end their relationship, finding solace and support in Alain, who would soon become her fiancé. However, Rudolph struggled to accept that Maeva had moved on. His inability to let go persisted even after Maeva became pregnant. Maeva once confided in her mother about an incident where Rudolph tried to kiss her on a bridge, but she firmly pushed him away. Rudolph's behavior did not cease with the birth of Maeva's child. His obsession continued as he bombarded her with texts, pleading for a reconciliation. Alain, seeing Rudolph's relentless interference, decided to confront him. He warned Rudolph to stop harassing Maeva, but the warnings were ignored. In an effort to put an end to Rudolph's behavior, Alain showed these desperate messages to Rudolph's girlfriend at the time, Crystal. This revelation led Crystal to end her relationship with Rudolph, which devastated him. This breakup pushed Rudolph to his limits. On the night of his fatal accident, he had been drinking heavily at a bar. In a drunken state, he grabbed a hammer and determinedly set off to confront Alain. Bar patrons recalled his troubled demeanor that night, sensing that trouble was imminent. As police and ambulance sirens later filled the night, many suspected the worst had occurred. Tragically, Rudolph never reached Alain's house. His car crashed on a curve and he died at the scene despite efforts by paramedics to save him. His sudden death shocked everyone, particularly his mother, Enda. From that point, Enda devoted herself to finding someone accountable for her son's demise. She irrationally blamed Maeva, even showing up at her house with threats, declaring that Maeva would suffer for Rudolph being in the grave. Fearing for her safety, Maeva filed a police report detailing the threats from Rudolph's mother, who vowed revenge. The police report was intended to defuse the situation, but it only worsened the tension. Every day, Enda impressed upon her husband that Maeva was at fault for their loss and urged him to take action. Eventually, Rouberoi came to believe it was his destiny to avenge his son's death. 2 months before the tragedy, he confronted Maeva and Alain at their home with threats and accusations. Rouberoi glared at Maeva, blaming her for Rudolph's death and vowing to seek revenge. He flaunted his connections and wealth, hurling insults that only heightened the family's distress. This confrontation served as a grim precursor to the calamity that would later unfold. 8 months after Rudolph's demise, Barrois shifted from threats to action. He broke into Alain and Maeva's residence one night while only Maeva and their young son Lorenzo were home. Maeva awoke to find herself cornered by a man overwhelmed by rage, which clouded his judgment completely. This unchecked anger culminated in a dreadful act. Investigators were still trying to ascertain the role his wife, Enda Barrois, played in the crime. Although Enda claimed innocence regarding the murder itself, she was implicated in the aftermath. Upon his return home, she instructed Roux to dispose of Maeva's purse, the critical piece of evidence that could illuminate the events of that night. During her testimony, Enda denied any prior knowledge of her husband's intentions. She portrayed him as having acted independently, losing his sanity in the process. She told investigators she had never solicited such an act from him and was unaware of his actions being driven by her instigations. Nevertheless, doubts about her involvement persisted. Her demeanor throughout the trial was telling. Enda appeared primarily concerned with her potential sentencing, frequently casting anxious glances at the lawyers, reporters, and judges. Her foremost worry seemed to be the possibility of receiving a 3-year prison term, overshadowing the fact that her husband faced a life sentence. On the witness stand, she exhibited no remorse, solely focused on avoiding incarceration herself. During the trial, Rouberoi never admitted to premeditating the murder. The question of whether his wife had influenced him wasn't addressed in court, though many believed Enda had a role in the crime. It was suspected that she had manipulated Roux, persistently pressuring him to act on his grief, something he might not have done on his own. Even in the courtroom, her demeanor was cold and controlling, as if she was still trying to influence Roux's testimony. In the end, Rouberoi was sentenced to 20 years in prison for Maeva's murder, while Enda received a 2-year sentence for instructing the destruction of Maeva's purse, a vital piece of evidence. Maeva's family felt the punishments were far too lenient, especially for Enda, whom they saw as the mastermind who pushed her husband to commit the heinous act. Yet neither Roux nor Enda appealed their sentences. After Maeva's tragic death, their son Lorenzo was left without his mother. He was initially cared for by a child psychologist to help him process the trauma and loss. Eventually, Lorenzo was placed with relatives and his life began to slowly return to some sense of stability. Little is known about what became of Alain after the tragedy. For those who knew Maeva, memories of her remain in the form of photos and videos, reminders of a life stolen too soon by hatred and revenge. This story serves as a chilling reminder of how grief, if left unchecked, can spiral into destruction, taking not just one life, but tearing apart entire families. The tragedy began with the reckless actions of Rudolph, whose own choices led to his death. But for his parents, the grief was unbearable. Enda Barrois became obsessed with revenge, feeding off Rue's pain and ultimately driving him to commit a monstrous crime. In the end, Maeva and her son Lorenzo became the innocent victims of uncontrollable emotions, with Rue being responsible for his own actions, yet clearly fueled by his wife's manipulation. This heartbreaking tale illustrates the importance of managing grief before it transforms into a destructive desire for vengeance. In the end, neither revenge nor punishment brought peace to anyone. One family lost a loving daughter, mother, and wife, while another lost a son. It's a tragic and painful story reminding us all of the destructive power of unresolved grief. Take care of yourselves and those you love. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. There are more shocking stories on the way.